Hey everyone, Till here. Today I'm reviewing the Bigme HiBreak, which is a phone that's running on Android 11, and this has a 5.8-inch e-ink display. So this phone looks very different compared to phones with color displays. First of all, a disclaimer, this is a review unit provided by the company, and in this video I'll just present to you my findings so that you can decide whether this is worth the money. This is Bigme's online store, and the price of this phone is US $249 for the black and white version, which is this one that I have here. And for the color version, it's $279. This review is going to be quite long, so if you want to save time, you can check out the text review that I have already written, or just use the timestamps provided to jump to different sections of this video. As usual, let me give you the bottom line up front. The main selling point here is the e-ink display. So this has excellent legibility under direct sunlight, and this is just great for reading. This is still a phone, so you can use smartphone features, and there is Google Play Store, so you can install whatever apps you like. There are limitations with an e-ink display, such as latency, ghosting, and the number of gray levels that this can produce. So latency is not really an issue here, which is actually quite surprising to me because the web browsing experience is, I would say, decent for an e-ink device. You can certainly use this for web browsing, and there isn't much ghosting, which is quite amazing to me. Because this display can only show a limited number of gray levels, some of the designs that are converted from color to grayscale or black and white are not going to work. For example, with Google Maps, I cannot see the small roads and I cannot even see the buildings. You can watch videos on this phone, but there will be this constant flickering effect. When using social media, everything is in black and white, so the user experience is not going to be ideal. And that can be considered a selling point for this phone. So if you want to stay away from social media, this phone can help you. There aren't many features from the OS and from the UI, but you can install those additional features if you want to. Overall performance, I would say, is pretty smooth. The processor in this phone is not that powerful, but this phone is not that demanding, so overall performance is quite smooth, and obviously don't expect to play games. There is 6 gigs of RAM, so multitasking is still alright, 128 gigs of internal storage, and there is micro SD card for storage expansion. This phone also supports 4G cellular, there is GPS, but there is no NFC. Battery life is about 10 to 15 hours, usually on the higher side, unless you are using the phone constantly. And this phone is trying to prevent you from using the phone that often, so you're going to get pretty good battery life. Downsides, there is only one speaker. The call quality is actually okay. There is no auto brightness for the front light, and there is no face unlock or fingerprint unlock. The full charge will take 2.5 hours, and this USB-C port only has USB 2 transfer speeds. Battery drain overnight is 1% per hour unless you enable airplane mode. There is noticeable light glow at the bottom edge for the front light. An e-ink display will have limitations. So for me, when it comes to using a device with an e-ink display, my expectations would be lower. With this phone, I don't think there are major deal breakers, and some of the e-ink limitations may actually prevent you from using this phone that often. So if you want to stay away from social media, this phone can help you. Alright, on to the full review. Let's see what's included with the purchase. Let's look at the e-ink settings you can change. So this is the e-ink center, and the settings can apply globally or to specific apps that you use. I find default settings to work best because this is a good balance between latency, ghosting, and visual quality. I actually did not test all these features, so I can't really tell you exactly what are the main differences because default already looks pretty good to me. Now with Comic, you can get the packaging box is as simple as you can get, and inside you will find a quick start guide, the phone, and there is a SIM ejection tool. No power cable and charger are included. When you first take the phone out of the box, it's not powered on obviously. So what you see here is the always on display that I have already set to show the clock and the calendar. This to me is a pretty cool looking phone, and it's certainly very different compared to phones that are using LCD or OLED displays. When you're using this phone outdoors, people are going to look at you to see what you're using, and you'll get used to that after a while. The bezels are quite thin on these two sides, thicker at the top and bottom. This phone only has one speaker and the audio is loud enough. The audio has decent amount of details, but it lacks bass, and for calls it sounds alright. When you have the audio at maximum volume, the audio will start to sound distorted and you will feel the vibration on the back. That's a 5 megapixel camera, and this phone does not have face unlock or fingerprint unlock, and there is no auto brightness. Weight of this phone is 170 grams, and this is not considered a very big phone. So this is just 5.84 inches, and this is really comfortable to hold and handle. On the left side, there is one shortcut button that you can customize. And you can see this side here is curved. The display is actually on top of this curved part, and the back is below the curved part. This phone supports 4G cellular, and this is the tray for the nano SIM and micro SD card. The corners are rounded off, including the corners for the display. And on this side, we have the power button and volume control buttons. There's the USB-C charging port below with USB 2 transfer speeds. And these are the mics. Audio quality for the mics. The back is made with plastic. Actually, this whole phone is made with plastic. This is a 30 megapixel camera with a small flash. And this bag has leather-like look to it, but it feels, well, plastic of course. And that's the Bigme logo. Build quality of this phone feels sturdy enough to me. This display may look like it's laminated, but there is actually a very small gap between the surface and the e-ink. So I have strong light source coming from the left, so I can see some shadow effect on the left edge here, but on the right edge there is no shadow effect, and that's due to that little gap. But overall, I would say the visuals still look good. It looks like the e-ink is almost on top of the display itself. It looks really good. DPI for this black and white phone is 275, and for the colored phone it's 91.5. And since I do not have the colored phone, I can't tell you what are the major differences. The resolution is 720 by 1440, and the visuals look really sharp to me. This is not a glossy display. This is a matte textured surface with semi-gloss finishing. This is how reflections look on the Bigme phone, and I would say the anti-glare works quite well, as in this will diffuse the reflection, but you can still see what's on the screen. Under direct sunlight, this e-ink display looks absolutely amazing. This is how the e-ink display looks in the dark, but this is not completely dark of course. Let me enable the front light. There is no warm and cool light, so there's just this light. This is 50%, this is 100%. If you're using this in the dark, you probably can just use this at less than 50% brightness. One downside here is there is no auto brightness, so at night you will have to swipe down and increase the brightness manually. Let's have it at maximum brightness because I want to show you let me just go down to 50% or 40% because I want to show you the glow at the bottom. The lighting is quite even on the display except for the bottom edge here where you can see the glow. So that's the glow at the bottom. Legibility with the front light on, I would say, is pretty good. Typical limitations for e-ink displays would be latency, ghosting, and contrast for the gray levels, and advantages would be excellent legibility in bright environment, and battery life is pretty good when viewing static content. When you are reading, after the page has been drawn, this page and this display will no longer use battery life because unlike LCD or OLED that needs to use battery life to actually show you the colors and to create the brightness, e-ink does not need that. E-ink just needs to draw the page and you can leave it as it is. So right now I'm in a room that is quite bright and the visual quality from the e-ink looks really good. The text looks sharp and the text size is big enough for me to read, and you can adjust the text size depending on the app you use. Let's talk about latency and ghosting. So as I flip the page, you can see the page actually doesn't move that fast, and that may depend on which app you are using. So let me just use a web browser so that I can scroll up and down to show you the scrolling more obviously. That's how fast it takes for the app, in this case Microsoft Edge, to load. The keyboard is big and comfortable enough for typing, and as you type, the letters will not appear instantly because this is e-ink, so there is that extra bit of latency, which is not a big deal by the way. So this circle here is actually the nav bar, and if you press it, there are shortcuts that you can customize. Let's see how fast this website can load. This is the Guardian, and this is loading pretty quickly. So let's scroll down. So as I scroll down, you can see there is that extra bit of latency and ghosting. Now pay attention to this picture here. As I scroll up, notice there is no ghosting or image retention of this picture that was earlier here. So this actually looks pretty good. I mean, if you look very closely, there is slight ghosting or image retention in the blank areas, but the ghosting or image retention is not distracting, which is very important. And as I scroll slowly, notice how there is minimal ghosting or image retention. So what surprised me about this phone is this is actually usable for web browsing. Now you have to set your expectations right with an e-ink display because this is not going to be as responsive compared to LCD and OLED. That's just the way it is. But for an e-ink display, this amount of responsiveness to me is actually pretty good. Bigme did not mention what type of e-ink display this is, whether it's Kaleido 3 or some other display. The most important thing you need to know about this black and white phone is it can only produce a limited number of grays. And because of that, there will be certain issues with contrast depending on how the app was designed and also how the user interface elements are designed. Let's compare e-ink with a colored display. So this is Google Maps and I have the same location loaded. By the way, this phone has GPS because it has cellular. So on the colored display, I can see the gray roads that are smaller, but those are missing here. So as I zoom in, I can see the gray buildings. Now if I zoom in here, now I can see the gray roads, but they are not that obvious. And you can see this gray road here, it's very obvious, but here the contrast is just not that good. And if you don't look closely, you may not even notice there is a big road here. So as I zoom in really close now, I don't even see the shapes for the buildings. Yeah. With the limited number of grays, this app is not able to show you extra details, and for details that you can see, you may not be able to see them clearly. Now, all these apps are designed for color displays, so when they convert to gray automatically, they are not going to convert perfectly. Let's take a look at Google Play Store. At the top here, there should be a colored box. You can see that on the colored display. And here you can see the colored background for all these categories. You can see the categories because there are text labels, but you cannot see the colored background. So without this text label, you may not even know that this is a search box and these are actually buttons. So there are actually certain apps where the buttons are not clear, so you don't know that there is a button there for you to press. So here you can see this button, it's very obvious, but sometimes it's not. For example, this cancel button, this is not obvious at all that it's a button. You can watch videos on this phone if you want to, but the experience is not going to be ideal. There is this constant flickering when watching YouTube videos for some reason. Let's talk about how the limitations with e-ink display can actually make you more productive. So with this phone, I don't feel like watching videos because of the video quality. And also there are no colors. So let me just close this. And the black and white visuals, they are just not that enticing to look at. I mean, it's good as in the quality of the gray reproduction is good enough, except for the issue with the contrast that I mentioned earlier with the apps and the design for those apps. Now this is actually alright, but this is not as satisfying to use compared to using Instagram on a colored phone. Definitely. And because it's less satisfying to use social media or watching videos on this phone, you may use this phone less. So with this phone, this is going to try and demotivate you from using social media so that you can spend your time doing other things, which is what I like about this phone and its limitations being used as an advantage. This phone will be great for listening to podcasts, to music with your wireless earphones because there is no 3.5mm audio jack. Next, let's talk about performance. This phone is using the MediaTek Helio P35 processor, which has 8 cores. Now this is not a very powerful processor, but for a phone that is not that demanding, this is powerful enough. There is 6 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of internal storage, and you can expand storage with the micro SD card. Now, the navigation gestures are a bit different compared to normal phones. So you can swipe up in the middle to go to the home screen. To get to the app switcher, you have to swipe from the bottom left. 6 gigs of RAM is still a decent amount for multitasking. You will have to learn some of the gestures. For example, with app switcher, you cannot just scroll to different apps. You have to use the pagination or the page buttons here to flip to different pages with the active apps. I've only been using this phone for slightly more than a week, and the overall performance to me is pretty smooth, with the main limitation coming from the e-ink display. So even if you put like the latest Snapdragon processor in this, that is also going to be limited by the e-ink display. Obviously, this is not a phone for gaming. By the way, remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not. Let's talk very quickly about the OS and the UI. So So this phone is running on Android 11 and this is the user interface on top of that. There aren't many features, so let me just go through the more interesting ones. Under screensaver is where you can set the always on display, and I have it set to show the clock and the calendar. You can also show other stuff, but the clock and the calendar to me is most useful. And you can choose between 1, 5, 10 and 30 minutes for the clock refresh interval. Next we will look at custom key, which is this button. You can set shortcuts for single click, double click, long press, and you can choose from the pre-programmed shortcuts. The float ball is very useful. It's this navigation bar that you can move around. When you tap on it, nice shortcuts will appear and you can customize all the shortcuts. So let me press this. So you can set one shortcut for each button. You can choose from the, again, pre-programmed shortcuts available. Under power manage is this feature called raise to wake, which you may want to enable. With raise to wake, you can raise your phone to show the passcode screen, but you can see there is this 1 to 2 second delay, so it's actually faster to just use the power button. For quick settings, you can just swipe down from the top right. For notifications, it's from the top left. There are more Android settings hidden behind more settings, and some of those settings are not applicable for an e-ink display. For example, if you choose to adjust the brightness here, this will not adjust the front light brightness, and some of the settings here just don't work. Let's look at the e-ink center, where you can adjust the e-ink settings, and you can have the settings apply globally or specific to apps. I find default settings to work best because this gives you a good balance between latency, ghosting, and visual quality and contrast. By the way, I did not test all these features because I don't even know what some of them actually mean. So let's see, there's anti-shake, auto clean, refresh mode, which is the speed of refresh, contrast settings, which is how this is locked right now. So depending on which mode you select here, some of the settings may be locked, and there is full refresh frequency. So let's switch over to magazine. This is the magazine setting, and you can see the visual quality difference from default is not that dramatic, but the way the page refreshes is much slower. This is the comic setting, and it looks just the same as magazine setting, and the page refreshes really slowly. This is the video mode, where the visual quality is sacrificed for faster refresh. So now when you scroll left and right, this is actually faster compared to default settings. And we are back to default. So this has decent amount of contrast, and the scrolling speed is still quite decent, smooth. Battery life is difficult for me to measure accurately because this is an e-ink display. Having said that, I would say that the battery life of this phone is pretty good. So based on how I have used this phone for almost 2 hours for the recording of this video, and based on my experience with the other days that I've been using the phone, I would say the battery life is around 15 hours. Now, if you use the phone a lot, maybe the battery life will be 10, 12 to 15 hours. So with an e-ink display, once the screen is drawn, this is not going to use the battery anymore, which is really fantastic. One downside regarding the battery is the charging speed is really slow. I was able to charge 40% per hour, so a full charge will require 2.5 hours. The other downside is the overnight battery drain. If you leave cellular and Wi-Fi on overnight, it's going to drain 1% per hour. So if you sleep for 10 hours, the battery life is going to drop 10%, which to me is kind of high. So what you have to do each night is to enable airplane mode, and for 10 hours it's going to drop maybe 2 to 3% battery life instead. Alright, to conclude, the Bigme HiBreak to me is a very interesting phone for people who want a simple phone. It's for people who want to stay away from social media, and it still functions like a phone. You can take calls, you can message people, you can install WhatsApp, and you can install those social media apps if you really want to, because there is Google Play Store. Overall performance is pretty smooth for an e-ink device. This is a budget phone, so there will be limitations, but I don't think there is any deal breakers. If Bigme can add more features and fix some issues with this phone for their next model, that would be great. More specifically, it would be great if they can add face unlock or fingerprint unlock, maybe add NFC, try and fix the battery drain overnight. Alright, let me know in the comment section what you think of this phone and whether you are interested to buy something like this. And if you are interested to buy this phone, you can check out the links that I have for you in the video description below. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video. Bye!